Well, I'm glad to see that the discussion of perfection is being well attended. So we're going to begin by going to the Orient for a moment and start with a Buddhist monk by the name of Kobo Daishi. This particular man was not only a great spiritual leader, but a world-famous artist in his own time, a painter, a sculptor, an architect. Many arts were perfected within his own life. On one occasion, he was asked to carve a dragon to go on the top of the arch of the roof of a temple. And he made it so magnificently and so lifelike that when it was put in place, it slowly started to come to life. And Kobo saw what was happening, and he took his paintbrush, dipped it in black paint, and threw it up to the roof, and it made a spot on the dragon. And immediately the dragon settled down and made no further efforts to come to life and remained for 500 years. Now this, of course, is a bit of a fable, but it is part of an idea that I think has considerable basic value. In the Orient also, we find the great cult of imperfection. Nearly every artist of the Eastern school deliberately makes a mistake in his work. He does this because he considers perfection to be a kind of audacity. Also, that it becomes the end of his own growth. He must always be not quite perfect, and everything that he does must have a flaw so that he can continue to grow. Now, the flaw is symbolical in many cases, but it is always there for fear that the object which he has perfected would fly away unless something held it back. So he made a little mistake. He left a little crack that he didn't fill. He made a small mistake in drawing so that no one would notice it, but heaven noticed it and enabled the item to remain part of our earthly world. Now, on another level of this type of thinking, we come to a common problem that we all face in life. Perhaps this is behind the Oriental point of view. We know, for instance, that nearly all arts come to a completeness and then die. We know that the moment we are confronted with any achievement which cannot be improved upon, something ceases. And where an art is so great that we cannot exceed it, it gradually deteriorates until it fades away. We have this in modern painting, sculpturing, and other arts, graphic and architectural. We look back upon Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and we say we cannot excel them. They have done everything that was possible to do in terms of art, not only in technique but in inspiration, the inner life of the artist. Regardless of his personal character, when he worked with his art, something tremendous moved in upon him. Today, this art we call classic, and the modern world is trying desperately to disprove it. They want to tell us that these new things that are coming along are much greater. We have freedom now. We have tremendous integrities. Things that we can't recognize. Not long ago, a large modern painting was hung in an exhibition gallery upside down because no one could figure out what the top and bottom were. This is what happens to an art which the individual feels he cannot excel. There are very few modern artists that are going to compete with Leonardo. They're just going to ignore him, develop a style of their own, influence an agent to take care of a distribution, and hope for the best. The great art, the great music, the great sculpturing cannot be excelled. Perhaps it should be. There should be something else we can do. But what can we do to the Cathedral of Cologne that has not been done? One answer was very evident. Shortly after World War II, a committee was formed to reconstruct the church and make it modern. They were going to change this magnificent Gothic structure into a Rococo building filled with gilts, floating cherubs, and everything you could think of. Fortunately, heaven or something stepped in and the project failed. But everywhere we find this problem of trying to find out how far we can take things, how far we can carry them, before we meet the inevitable termination. This applies not only to art, but to every achievement of humanity. There comes a point where there seems to be no further that we can go in any direction, or in any structure, or any concept of life. We find it very hard to excel the religions of the past. We find it very hard to outgrow classical philosophies. And we look around us and we find nearly everything of the past in a kind of sedate ruin. We have not been able to add to it, and because we cannot improve it, it fades away. So this is one of the problems that is involved in the concept of perfection. We all would like to feel that we are growing. There are very few people who really would like to assume that they are already perfect. If they are, or if they think they are, the only direction is down. There is no further they can go. And many an egotist has gone down, simply trying to assume that he could surpass his own intelligence. Actually, therefore, in government, in world affairs, in everything, there comes a time when we must reconsider our own attitudes. We must reconsider them in relationship to our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, our families, and every involvement that we have in life. There is no reason to assume that the average human being is perfect, and very little likelihood that he will become perfect in the present as far as we can see it. Life is an eternal growth. That which no longer grows deteriorates. There is either progress due to internal strength or the structure fails. Today we are in one of these emergencies. We have come so far and done so much and accomplished so little. Here we are in this century, behind us hundreds of wars, and further wars threatening. Here we are with a literature that is tremendous and never read. We are here with a great art that is condemned as puritanical or archaic. Everywhere the modern takes over. But unfortunately, the modern is not keyed to progress. It is keyed only to change and innovation. Things are not better necessarily because they change their appearances. They are better only when they release more of integrity through themselves. Now, most people are a little unhappy at the kind of world we live in today. We are inclined to be very critical of the conduct of other people. And we are also fully aware that they are critical of our conduct. And the question always remains, what is the best answer to this perplexing dilemma? How are we going to keep on growing ourselves? Or are we also going to go into stagnation? I think a life spent around a television set is in stagnation already. And those whose lives surround only physical luxuries, who are developing habits in narcotics, alcoholism, and other related infirmities. These people are called disillusioned. We refer to them as failures, and they think of themselves as blocked by irreconcilable conflicts of life. The individual is either growing or is not growing. And all growth is improvement, but all change is not improvement. Therefore, we observe the gradual failing away of a civilization, a culture, as Rome died, as Egypt died. these great civilizations finally came to the point where they could add nothing to their previous accomplishments, and at that moment they ceased to exist. Until, as Hermes says in one of his great essays, that there would be nothing left of Egypt but ruins buried in the sand. Now, the same thing can happen to people. The individual can reach a point of ruin. The individual can come to a place in his own life in which he sees no future and can think only in terms of sitting back and trying to enjoy what he has already accomplished. He soon finds that this accomplishment and this joy are both very impermanent, unsatisfactory, and fleeting. So we also can say to people, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, what is the next step to improve it? If you're in business, how can you do it better? If you're an artist, how can you paint a greater picture? If you're a musician, how can you come to greater virtuosity with your instrument? Satisfaction is the beginning of death, and satisfaction also stands in the way of those who reach a point where they do not know how to grow further, who do not know what to think next. And we are in a world here under a universal pattern of realities by which we are supposed to grow as long as we live. We are supposed to grow to the last moment and last breath of our material existence and go forth ready to grow some more in the future. How are we going to face this with problems that constantly confront us? Age may reduce our efficiencies in many ways. The changes in social conditions can affect and afflict us. Everywhere there are problems, most of which we face by evading. We do not come front on to these problems. We seek to escape any further pain, disillusionment, discouragement, and slowly retire into a kind of internal neurotic isolation, which is nothing but the beginning of death. So that we are constantly thinking in terms of classical wisdom, that we must live and live by growing. When we cease to grow, we cease to live. There is no reward in nature to sit back and contemplate proudly previous achievements. There is nothing to be gained by smugly believing that we have done very well, or that we have done as much as we hope to do. No one does as much as he hopes to do unless he does all that it is possible for him to do. And this means sometimes a process of reorganizing the way of life to which he belongs. He may find that he has gradually fallen into bad mental habits, that the mind which was given to him to think with has become finally simply a kind of a ghostly castle in which ancient memories vie with each other. Actually, the individual must continue to improve. Life is an art, and all arts must be improved. Not that we expect to perfect a life, but we expect to bring it a little nearer to that fulfillment which we now understand. The flaw is left there because as we grow, we will understand more. And any sense of ultimate perfection must not be allowed to develop within our consciousness. We can be grateful, thankful, and a little proud, perhaps, that we have achieved certain ends. But the moment these ends are achieved, we must move on. Any individual who settles back to enjoy his successes is already well on the way to failure. So as private citizens in our various walks of life, what are we going to do that might help us to gain a new dimension, a further unfoldment of our own potential? Well, we can make a very careful study of our available assets and liabilities. We can see where we are, what we are, and why we are, to the best of our abilities. We can realize that we have certain time at our disposal. Maybe a few years, maybe many years. How many years, we will not know. But there will always be a tomorrow until that day when the workman lays aside the tools of his craft, and goes into retirement, final and complete. Until then, we are all working. Now, after the economic system developed its tremendous pressures, life became a career. The only years in which the individual actually lived were those in which he was engaged in his chosen trade, craft, or profession. This means that he prepared himself by some educational system for a trade, a craft, or way of life. He practices this until he reaches what is termed retirement. Now, retirement is a bad term in itself. No one actually retires. No one can retire as long as he can breathe. But he can attempt to fill those years ahead with matters of no concern. He doesn't want to work hard anymore. He's a little tired of trying to think. He is more or less surrounded by people who are themselves giving up the fight. And he therefore has a tendency to settle back and lose the most important years of his life. One of the Greek philosophers observed that the most valuable years in a person's life are the years which follow after the ends of labor. In other words, retirement. That then the person has the clear field to observe and plan for what he is going to do next. He must do something. He must do something with the fact that his life, as he has lived it, has a defect in it. Every person's life is like the Japanese tea bowl. There is an intentional error somewhere in it. It isn't intentional as far as the individual really understood it, but it was a built-in error, which was the result of the limitation of human perspective, the inability of adequate knowledge, or the pressures of circumstances which he was unable to resist. But in any event, when we retire from business, we retire as an artist with more work to do before he can claim to be a master of his art. So whatever we're doing at the time when we decide that we are looking for peace, leisure, and quietude, we must ask ourselves very carefully just what this is going to do for us. If we are Zen people following some meditational system, then perhaps this retirement permits a further development of that particular quality of life. The individual improves his meditational life, enriches his internal mystical experiences. To others, this is merely an avocational period. Hobbies step in. All kinds of attitudes and obligations are assumed for pleasure, relaxation, or retirement. Yet everywhere the individual is, even though he may retire, there is something to learn, something to do, and another forward step to take. Sometimes this forward step is adjustment. An individual who has done his own way and had thought his own thoughts for life suddenly finds himself limited. This is a very important challenge. If he does not accept and solve the challenge of limitation, he is failing one of the greatest experiences of life. We can put it in simple thought that the whole of a person's life leads up to those years in which his experiences become the most important factors in his existence. And experiences are things to be studied, to be analyzed, to be examined. Experiences for the average person are compounds of success and failure. They prove that some things are right and that other things are wrong. Experiences also pass through a mental process in which very often they are completely misinterpreted. The individual who had a hard life begins to be sorry for himself instead of recognizing the tremendous experience potential he has to work with. There are so many things he can learn, so many things that he can do, simply because he has had a strenuous existence, and in these working years has contacted and worked with innumerable factors and persons. The problem, therefore, is to make sure that the progress of our lives is continuous, that it never stops even for a moment. It does not follow that this progress has to be unhappy. It has to be strenuous or under some kind of a strange, rigorous discipline. It simply means that the individual continues to learn and continues to grow. A great artist continues to learn. He gradually develops skills and techniques which enable him to excel himself. And in this world, growth is to excel oneself. And failure is to sit back and smugly feel that we've done all we could. There are many things in life that we have to look back upon as definitely unfinished incidents in themselves. We have to realize that in certain occasions, at least, we walk out on the lesson, that we tried to avoid it, that we would not accept it. Then there are other times in which we have failed to repair damage that we have committed. It's interesting, of course, to realize that the mind is very aware of unfinished business. It remains somewhere in our subconscious as a kind of question, as an uncertainty, as a certain disappointment, something that we didn't solve, something that didn't work out. We forgot to apologize to the person we had injured. We continued to dislike a person we should have forgotten and forgiven. And as long as the injuries remain, we cannot forget. We can only forget that which is solved. Therefore, anything that we bring forward in memory that is in any way unpleasant is something that needs to be done right now. It brings into focus something that the subconscious has carried as a burden for years and will carry to the end if we cannot compensate it in some way. This, I think, is one of the reasons why a certain group of very wealthy persons, before they pass on, donate to huge institutions, create libraries and hospitals and universities, because in some ways not only they can't take it with them, but they can't leave it behind and learn anything unless the gift they make is also wise. They've got to do something superior, perhaps, to what they've ever done during life. There is one case of a man who's very wealthy, who made it a definite boast in life that he never gave anything to anyone. No matter how needy, or how worthy, how wonderful the cause might be, he gave away nothing. And he reached his deathbed with everything that he possessed still in his own hands. This was a problem, however, that he had to face in some way. And when his will was read, he had given everything to the charities he'd refused a dime to while he was alive. Those are kinds of quirks of human nature. They are things that we don't really understand, but in one way or another they interfere with the gracious growth of our inner values. So we have to begin to see what is the next step toward perfection. Assuming that the perfection might be thousands of years in the future, or hundreds of embodiments from now, it is still important to begin the journey. The longest journey begins with one small step, and each individual must make as much amends as he can to make the life he is completing as useful and as permanently valuable to his growth. He must therefore begin to build in the values which will survive the vicissitudes of change. I think one of the problems that we all face in these times is the need to recover from a certain habit, the habits of frustration. The ancients didn't suffer from the habits of frustration as much as we do, because they lived in a much simpler world. And while many of them passed through their lives without any great achievement, they didn't have this tremendous sense of futility that has descended upon this generation of human beings. There is a tremendous sense of hopelessness or helplessness. Now, this is all based upon the concept that the individual is completely at the mercy of his environment. It means that the person cannot do anything he wants to do because society will not let him do it. And yet this cannot be regarded as a valid excuse, because after all, no matter how heavily society impinges upon us, the inner life of the individual remains his own, not only from the cradle to the grave, but from the beginning to the end of his evolutionary cycle. There is no way in which an outside circumstance can completely frustrate the possibility of internal growth. It may be more difficult to grow under certain circumstances, but if this is true, then the achievement is that much more important. Wherever the person is, he must work toward the fullness and completeness of his own nature. So we try to look around to see what a human being should be. We have all kinds of biological definitions and so forth, and nearly all religions have their ideas as to what a human being should be. But there is also within most of us, and brought forward from centuries of relationships, a kind of general idea of what constitutes a good person. We may not really believe we can achieve it, or we may think we already have done it. But regardless of what we think, there is something every individual can face, and that is the possibility of internal growth. And this probably is very closely associated with the clash of opinionism. We hardly pick up a newspaper or anything in which we do not find articles that distress us, that we don't like, that we don't believe. Some of these apply to conditions in which certainly all human beings are in common accord. But there are many cases in news in which items of the news come directly to some small personal opinion of our own. The opinion may not be stated in our words, but it arose in a condition of society similar to our condition, and therefore it impinges strongly upon us. All this type of impression can come under various types of ulterior motive or ulterior thinking. The individual can have prejudices, and prejudices can be tremendous things. They can be the greatest imperfections in the life of a person. A prejudice is something in which our own attitudes, very personal and very unenlightened, pass final judgment upon something we have not properly or intelligently estimated. A prejudice is the process of, in logic, in which every human being dislikes the dog that bit him, and regard that way no longer wants a dog. It doesn't make any difference how many wonderful animals there are. The person is prejudiced by an experience in his own life, and this is one of the most common causes of mistakes in human nature. We have a person belonging to a certain group. That person disappoints us or disillusions us. As a result, we turn from the whole group. We are not able to measure things by their own values. We cannot measure them entirely without consideration of the previous popularities or lack of popularity which these experiences portray. So little by little we build up attitudes that are not the result of thought, but are the result of feeling, a complete irrational feeling. Now, feelings can be a very difficult thing. Feelings should be transmuted into great artistic creativities, but they aren't always. Very often feelings are very personal mistakes in the character defects of the person. Now, why would a person have wrong feelings? Well, he's been hurt. Perhaps he has not been educated to understand the values and facts involved. Perhaps he has not become aware of the way of life of the world in which he lives. Perhaps he is too local in his thinking. He has not gone out into the larger world of life. In his religion, perhaps he has never been further from his own beliefs than the church down the street. All kinds of limitations show up under these circumstances. And how do we know that these limitations should be changed? Perhaps they are right. Perhaps we should have these feelings. Perhaps we should acknowledge that the shoe we're wearing hurts. But it always has hurt, and it always will. This type of feeling is something we have to work with very strenuously to find out what our attitude is. When we say, I don't like Jones, we should pause right then to find out why. We may not like him because he has an unpleasant disposition. This would apparently justify our attitude. But we might also question many other facts about him. We may ask ourselves what we would do if we were Mr. Jones, but we're not. But we might realize the fact that he has passed through certain saddening experiences, frustrations, disillusionments, cruelties, that he has been under persecution for religion or race or something of this kind, and has come out embittered and very often disillusioned. But the most of us who do not feel that we are in those conditions also come out of life somewhere along the line with a certain number of prejudices, antagonisms, and attitudes which we do not wish to change, but which should change in order that our growth may be continuous and creative. So the fact that it's not easy to find perfection might also remind us that we cannot find it in others, but we seldom try to check to see how much of it we have in ourselves. Actually, when it comes down to the details, we are just about average, most of us. We have the same general feelings, the same general attitudes that we often resent in other people. We assume that our causes for these attitudes are correct and honorable. But we also assume that these causes in other people, which we do not like, are not honorable, are not in line with the experiences of life. Taking all in all, a life experience is a strangely checkered thing. Life experience is a series of adjustments. The individual is constantly under some kind of ulterior influence. The world we live in now is becoming more and more overshadowed by circumstances, conditions, and pressures which frustrate the average human being. We are under a tremendous industrialized system. We are constantly under the pressure of promotion and publicity. We are being bombarded every moment with temptations to extravagance. Every part of our life is burdened by confusion, and most of the people that we know, who might normally be very pleasant individuals, are under pressure and are also inclined to lose their dispositional assets. All of this is something that we can't do too much about, but we cannot afford to allow a world's condition to completely destroy ourselves. We have to find ways to survive the pressures that we face. Actually, there must be some reason for these pressures, or they wouldn't be here. There's a great question arises on many hands in the course of time, and that is why the universal laws of existence were so complicated. If God was all-powerful, why doesn't He make us all happy and let it rest at that? Why does He make life increasingly difficult for every generation? Why is so much demanded of us, and at the same time we remain so ignorant as to how to solve our own problems? Well, this can go on forever, but the fact of the matter is that discipline is involved. We are, as a group of human beings, suffering from a serious case of spoilage in most instances. We have too many privileges, too many opportunities, and not enough real integrity. We are not ready to fight for principles, but we are often ready to fight against them. We are not able to accept lessons with dignity. We want to find ways out of them. We want to hire someone to take care of our affairs. We want to transfer our moral life to the clergy. We want to transfer our health to the physician. We want to transfer our legal problems to the attorney. We do not want to carry problems because we say we're not prepared to carry them. We don't know how to carry them. Well, it's true. And in these areas, progress is not perfect. We are not really completely qualified for many decisions. But 9 people out of 10 are qualified for better decisions than they make. In some cases, they can only do the best they can. But if they've really done that, there is a certain peace of mind that comes from that. But where they are reaching out for something they don't deserve and don't get it, then there is great trouble and distress and emergency in the family. So we have to try to find out what to do about the kind of world we live in. Today we are living in a most complicated world. The threat of war hangs over our heads. This is probably one of the great threats of existence. And yet, when it comes to trying to solve the problem of war, it's not so easy. One of the reasons it's not so easy is that war is so wound into everything else that involves our existence. If peace was firmly declared, unemployment would double. And the individual who is employed is more concerned with working than he is with what he is making. These things are hard to equate, and in many instances we will not be able to solve them immediately. Then we have displaced persons. We have tremendous tangles and projects that seem to have no beginnings and no ends. But out of these projects there slowly emerges a pattern of universal purpose. And in spite of all our discontents and the miseries of existence, today, if we are very thoughtful, we can see the pattern coming through all around. Things are definitely moving, and finally they are moving in the right direction. But they will not move in the right direction completely until they have moved in every wrong direction and found it out. The individual is always going to take the lines of least resistance, and integrity requires the lines of the greatest resistance. So we are looking around to find how to improve or get a little nearer to perfection in the various aspects of our thinking. I believe that one of the most important things that we have to work with is to find some kind of a basic concept of value that we can accept, that does not require the belief in strange and marvelous things that we don't understand. That there are ways in which we can simply face facts that have been proven by ages of application. Principles do not change. The applications of principles may change, but the integrities are basic, and the problems that we have arise from our resistance to these integrities. So for the person who is not going to go into a profound scholarly research, a research which may prevent him from ever having any time to do the things he discovers, we will face into a very simple problem, the next step in self-improvement. What is the next thing that we must do to really grow? Well, it isn't a vacation in the Bermudas. It isn't another weekend in Las Vegas. The things we have to do in order to get straightened out is to find out how to make our own thinking straight, constructive, and realistic. These changes are necessary. We are now moving largely upon appetites. We are moving upon privileges and pleasures. We are wasting our lives and our goods in the desperate effort to enjoy ourselves. And gradually, one by one, these joys fade, and the end is misery. So we have to start with something, so let's try to think out a few basic facts. The first basic fact is that we as individuals are here to grow. We are not here primarily to have more. We are here to be more. And actually, of course, if we believe we must have more long enough, we will destroy ourselves and be right back in the position where we have to find out what we are worth as individuals, as living things. So that all the releases of internal have to do with internal values, realities. One of these, for instance, that we are working with constantly is the ability to face reality without tension. The individual does not have to depend upon a variety of sedatives in order to face the common tasks of living. It is perfectly possible to smooth out the inner life. This is done by discipline. And many of these disciplines are found in the mystical and esoteric religions of mankind. But their primary purpose is simply to allow the individual to do what is necessary and what must be done with the least strain upon himself. He can make things difficult or he can make things easy. He can accept a challenge in the beginning instead of having it forced upon him in the end. He can go through all kinds of changes and situations if something can be done to prevent his mind from becoming all confused, mixed up, and uncertain the moment an emergency arises. So we can say, if you can learn one thing, whatever happens, face it in a condition to use your faculties. If an emergency arises, you should think as clearly as possible. But in most emergencies, the individual destroys the power to think at the beginning of the emergency. He becomes involved in all kinds of pressures. He is looking for escapes. He is sorry for himself. He is antagonistic towards others. He dislikes his world. He knows all kinds of people responsible for his trouble. And he gets all worked up and ceases completely to improve as a person. In the course of doing this, by the way, of getting himself all worked up, he destroys his digestion, affects his elimination, endangers his vitality, and shortens his life. If he is enough worked up over a situation, he may have a stroke or a coronary, and the world will go on just as it was. And there will be no way in which he can really change the circumstances that he has forced upon himself. So the beginning of intelligent living is to live quietly, quietly within. This does not mean weakness. It does not mean that you agree with anything that is not right. But you face things directly, simply, quietly, without emotional overtones, and weigh all things and cling unto that which is good. This way is a great saver of energy. And a life lived this way is apt to develop a number of extra years in which to learn more and accomplish more that needs the doing. But at the beginning of every effort to grow, the individual must so attitude himself that he is not going to block all possibilities of growth before he has a chance to come. Having come to this meaningful decision, the person simply takes a deep breath and counts 10. That was Grandmother's favorite solution to problems. She always counted to 10, and if it didn't quite work, she counted to 10 again. And by the fourth or fifth cycle around to 10, she had the matter under control. So the moment an emergency arises, keep quiet. Do not commit yourself to anything. People have lost fortunes because they talk too soon. Actually, be quiet. Think all things through and try to work out for yourself the most just and the most benevolent way of solving the problem. If there is a problem involving temperaments and personalities, try to decide which of the persons involved is right. If you can't find any rightness in any of them, at least keep quiet. Do not, as Pythagoras said, stir fire with a sword. Relax. Do the best you can to arbitrate difficulties. And in the course of so doing, you start early enough, you will not have spoiled children, because they are largely spoiled because the parent cannot stand the pressure of young people's negative or confused attitudes. They want to control these children too much, but they do not give them the intelligent background to solve their own problems. So problemed parents are going to have problemed children. Problemed workmen are going to have problemed bosses. And problemed countries are going to have problemed leaders. An end. There has to be a way of cutting this Gordian knot that has disturbed humanity for thousands of years. You cannot say that the other side of the world will be peaceful if it doesn't want to be. But you can so understand your own relationship to it that you can learn vicariously the great lesson that they must learn in time. You can also make sure that you do not waste the years of your energy on problems that are unsolvable. Straighten out your attitude toward things. See the honest, see the real, see the good, and try your best always to have the courage to follow the dictates of conscience, but not go out and talk about it to everyone you know. The moment you begin to share your convictions, they begin to be diluted, until finally you are talked out of most of them. So starting with that, quiet comes first. Now the next thing that you have to figure out is, in the condition that you're in at the moment, just where you are now, what is your principal trial? What is happening to you right now, or what has happened over a long period of time that is weighing heavily upon your conscience at this moment? Why are you troubled? Oh, you can be troubled over a lot of small things, but why are you troubled over something great enough to cause you to worry or to dispositionalize your nature adversely? Well, one will say, I face a broken home. Another may say, I have a delinquent child. A third may say, I can't pay the rent. All kinds of problems can be disturbing the individual. After having gained the power of quietude, you then begin to think in terms of solution. You begin to figure out very quietly how to handle something that has kept you awake at night, has worried you and disturbed you and driven you to drink, perhaps. Find some simple and direct way of approaching the problem. Now, if this approach requires some kind of specialized knowledge, it is far better to get that knowledge than it is to keep on worrying. It may be that counseling is indicated. It may be that a good book on the subject will give you the information that you need. Or perhaps a better adjusted neighbor can help you through the problem. But you have to find out what it is, and you have to realize that it has a solution, and you must stop emotionalizing it, dramatizing it, and gradually becoming hopelessly neurotic over it. Neurosis is probably the most common ailment at the present time, and it is largely due to confused people who do not know what to do next. It is interesting, however, to realize that many of these neurotics are university graduates. They are successful in various fields of activity, but incidents have come along that have wrecked their dispositions. And the moment they have lost their orientation, they are on the verge of further catastrophe. The moment we emotionalize problems instead of solving them, these problems increase until they can completely destroy us. So we have to start to work with them quietly, patiently, intelligently. So we'll say, for example, that the individual is having employment problem. One of the reasons why he may be having employment problem is because he has been a very bad handler of his own finances. The problem of keeping out of financial worry is to handle finance intelligently. The moment gratification becomes the sole reason for wealth, you're in trouble. There are proper ways of controlling and directing. There are ways in which the individual will follow Ben Franklin's well-known advice, waste not and want not. Many people today, most people, are wasteful beyond possible conviction. Wasteful maybe only in small manners, but necessarily these must be rationalized. If the individual is in financial problem, he should sit down and figure out why. He should not worry because the union can't get him a raise. He should not worry because he needs a job that pays more money. The problem goes right straight back to himself. You should know what he can do. He knows what he can spend. He knows what he must save. An individual in our generation who has no time to save anything is in trouble. He knows it, but he doesn't want to believe it. Mostly we have conscience. We have a sense of values locked within ourselves, which will help us considerably if we use it. An individual will say, I shouldn't waste money, and then goes out and wastes it. The appetites are stronger than the resolutions, and that's the problem. But everywhere along the line you come along, there should be clear-cut clinging to facts. The individual should put the integrities first. Instead of trying to humor the spoiled child, the intelligent parent must try in every possible way to give that child a firm foundation on which to build a life. This, of course, interferes with a lot of things. It interferes with pleasure. It keeps the person at home, trying to take care of his children. These things we do not like to do today. We want complete freedom. And if we follow this concept long enough and continuously enough, we will have the ultimate freedom. We'll have nothing. And therefore, we will have nothing more to worry about, but nothing to do anything with. Actually, therefore, the moment we see a problem, and nearly all people have problems, they come every day with various attitudes. And we find that today a whole cycle of philosophies, religions, and literatures helping individuals to make the same mistakes and to do the things that they definitely shouldn't do. A literature or a doctrine which tells you that you can live badly and by some belief enjoy universal abundance, such a doctrine is simply false. All the way along now, the problem is to relieve responsibilities and increase opportunities, whether they are deserved or not. We have all kinds of mystical revelations on how to be happy without growing up. And this is not possible and not successful. We want to have all the little fallacies and all the little emotional excesses that we have learned to love. And at the same time, we want to be big, grown-up, and wise adults working towards elimination of our problems. This literature, this escapist literature, is gaining tremendous followings and is doing nothing to solve anything. So there again, we are faced with the imperfections which we all share. Now, after we get to the point where we begin to think through things, we also have another question we should always ask ourselves. To what degree are we living up to our own potential? Now, it's not possible to just say we all have the same attitudes, the same abilities, and the same patterns of life. We are each very individual in our attitudes and our capacities. But each person has a potential. Locked within his own psychic mental complex is a pattern of his own aptitudes, his own abilities, how far he can go with things. And sometimes we have people say, I wish I could understand this, or I wish I could find out more about that. This is exactly what the inner aptitude test is trying to tell us, that whenever we find that something is needed that we do not have, we might as well begin to realize that there are ways within ourselves by which this need can be met. Whatever we know we need, we know enough to solve. And we can accomplish a great deal by simply listening to an occasional statement of our own needs made by ourselves. If we need more abilities, if we need a better training, a better education, if we need a more enlightened religion, we need more exercise, we need a better diet, whatever it is, the inner life will probably tell us something, but it will not provide us with the courage to do what we really know we need. The result is most persons are living below the levels of their own intelligence. They're not doing all that they could do with the capacities that they actually possess, because they're at war with their own capacities. They are inclined to use capacity only for the fulfillment of personal pleasures or personal rewards. Another point that we have to come into contact with is the gradual change in society. What today is best understood in the way of life that we know. We are beginning to realize that the ambitions and the objectives of most people are essentially not right. The individual's objectives are nearly always bound to success in some form. But what kind of success? Success to most persons is affluence of some nature. It is fame, it is distinction, it is wealth. Success is superiority, and we must try to gain it. Well, how is the easiest way to be superior? Well, for the average group of persons, the easiest way to be superior is to gain greater wealth than your neighbor. Wealth becomes the basis of freedom, it becomes the basis of fulfillment, and it becomes the means of gratifying attitudes that are no use in the first place. So the individual looking for success today is striving for monetary success. I understand that sometime last week, I'm not quite sure the exact moment, the 5 billionth human being was born into this world. We now have a population of 5 billion people. And of those, we have 5 billion people who want something, or are going to. We have 5 billion people, each of whom, in his own heart of hearts, suspects that he is superior to all the others. This becomes very confusing, but it is part of our natural endowment. These 5 billion people, we are assured that in 10 to 15 years, they will be 6 billion. And so it will go. And even if we don't have any wars and we don't have any nuclear disasters, this is going to continue to go on because of the fact that we are all desirous of succeeding in life. And what is success? Success is the country home, the yacht, the condominium with the private dock. It is the Rolls-Royce car. It is anything you can think of. And everyone is being bled to meet this. I noticed in the paper the other day an announcement of a little snug-away vacation place. I won't get into the details of the matter, but it is just a charming little place where you can get away from all the worries of life, where you can commune with nature and others of similar mind. And it's a very, very moderate place to go to. You can have a room and bath there for $375 a day. And a lot of people will never be happy until they can pay it. If it's only one for one day, it is success. Well, this situation simply cannot go on. And the answer is very definitely that the motive behind life has got to be changed completely. Wealth cannot be the motive if humanity is to survive. It is not wealth in the term of external possessions. It is the wealth in the terms of internal integrities that must be developed, or our extravagances will simply destroy us. So we're learning this the hard way. Now, when we therefore try to learn this and have nothing but regrets that we're not among the privileged, we have to bear in mind that go right straight back, sit down quietly, count 10 with grandmother, and think it through straight, and see what you're talking about. Realize that what you are worried over has really little or nothing to do with the essential values of life and growth. There must be and will be a redistribution of our concepts of success, and we can start now. If we have a reasonable way of life, if we have the simple needs of life, if we have a few good friends and a congenial family, or have friends that we can depend on, then this is where ambition should normally end. They should be gradually transformed into aspirations. And aspirations have to do with the individual becoming, and ambitions have to do with his possessing. So we have all these little details, and we look around us, and that's why I think we find that perfection is really in short supply. It is in short supply because, for the first part, we don't recognize it if we had it. The second thing is that we are so busy being imperfect that we really have no time to try for perfection. We really want to do what we're doing. We really just want the problems to be removed so that we can keep on doing just as we please and enjoy all the securities of life. Now, this is possible only under one condition, that we please to do that which is reasonable. The Greeks were well aware of this before congestion moved in. The Egyptians found it and left the monuments in the sand of Egypt for their discoveries. Europe went through one war after another. We had the Inquisition, we had the Crusades, we had the bubonic plague. Everything imaginable has occurred to mankind. And gradually we are outgrowing the locked-in worldliness that we have suffered from. There's only one way out of this world, and that is to outgrow it. Until we outgrow it, we come right back and sit in it again. And the only way we can outgrow it is outgrowing our own mistakes and beginning to strive for those better things which would be the source of internal satisfaction without endangering external securities. We must all be better artists. We must all be better sculptors, better painters, better architects. We must all try to expand and improve the creative talents that we possess in order that we may gradually accomplish the biblical promise that we should be perfect in due time. Apparently the time isn't quite due because we're not there at the moment. But we are told, be ye perfect. Well, perfection means that the individual is in complete harmony with the reason for his own existence. He is one and completely in sympathy with the great plan of life to which he belongs. He is keeping the rules, and the rules are keeping him. He is filled with the security of integrities, and therefore he is on his way to a genuine perfection. When he gets to the point where he is perfect, he will be like the Kobodaichi's dragon. He will not be any longer struggling and wandering and fighting. The perfections of things are that the individual, having outgrown this world by solid growth, will proceed to other worlds that are better, but he'll keep right on growing to degrees and qualities we don't even believe to be conceivable. The human being is just something in the making. To us, he's a human being in the making and not doing it too fast. But beyond this, there's a lot more. The human being is potential universe. Everything that exists in space is there with him. Every growth and conceivable in the vast universal pattern of things will unfold as a great pattern for the unfoldment of human life and all other life that exists in our universe. We are all gradually moving towards perfection. And in that perfection, when we gain it, we will have perfected this kind of life. We will have outgrown the shadows and sorrows of mortal existence. We will have achieved the fullness of the potentials that we possess. And having done this, we will graduate with honors. We will no longer be dropouts. The average today person would like to be a dropout from this troubled world. But there's only one way to get out, be a dropout successfully, and that is to grow above the problem. Never to cast it aside, never to try to escape realities. The individual who tries to escape a reality simply falls into unreality himself. So in due time, we are going to be pretty good people, but we have a way to go. A lot of people realize this, and they're trying very hard. And the more the world around us becomes difficult, the greater the probability that the world within us will unfold and strengthen us. There is already a considerable group working in the world for the sincere purpose of trying to make this a better place. They belong to all kinds of groups and organizations, or they are separate individuals. But what they really are is individuals who have begun to think through the causes of their own troubles. They are individuals who have awakened to the fact that just drifting along is going to lead only to further confusion and later embodiments with no problem solved. The Oriental thinker, of course, has another dimension to consider. He is concerned with the next time around. Most people in the West don't believe in the next time around. But they might as well, because either that or its equivalent is somewhere waiting for them. But whether it's this next time around or no time around, because of the immediate punishment for misdeeds, which we no longer really take seriously, the problem remains that we have to live with ourselves until we can do it joyously. And when we can live with ourselves so happily and harmoniously that everything involved in the pattern is peace and tranquility, we will have to keep on trying to live with ourselves. So we go out of here perhaps with a little achievement, something a little more than we came in with, and we struggle on to another embodiment. And here we come back with all the unfinished business that we tried to avoid or evade in our previous embodiment. So what do? We simply land in a more difficult position than we expect or hoped we would land in. This is simply because we have made no plans for a better re-embodiment. If we really believed it, we'd begin living better right here and now, so that we wouldn't have to face all this difficulty and debility that lies ahead. The selfish individual who dies selfish will be reborn selfish, and it will keep on like that until selfishness dies in him. And every conceivable problem will present him with new opportunities to get over this selfishness. But he may fight on for another 10 embodiments before he takes advantage of the truth of the matter. So everywhere in this problemed world, we have to realize that there's no proof, no satisfactory evidence that getting out of here is going to solve anything. We do not have any reality of the idea that our sins will disappear with our flesh. They didn't begin with the flesh, and they won't end there. Our flesh was perfectly reasonable, perfectly simple flesh, a body to help us to live. Our sins were not in the body, but to the body. We sinned against it. We worked against it. We deprived of it of nourishment and relaxation. We gave it no proper care, and the body went. But the causer of that care is still the same person. And this causer of our care is the thing we have to think of, and it is always ourselves. So if we want to have a little better time, and if we want to have a little better world, we have to realize that this world all more or less comes in together. We've got a certain number of basic entities, and they come in patterns until all have had the same opportunities. Each pattern is a little different. Each challenge is a little different. Each karma has its own individual intensities. But everyone that comes back to learn the lessons they haven't learned yet. And those who have finally learned those lessons may return, but they return as teachers and guides and helpers of other persons. Those who come into this world, and we have great, great respect for them, individuals who have from birth sacrificed almost everything for the common good. Persons who have gone into the desert and the jungles, into plague-infested areas, the Father Damiens and the Albert Schweitzers, all these kind of people who have dedicated their lives to the service of humanity. They are a little nearer perfection because they have conquered more along the way than we have. It doesn't necessarily follow that they have ever had any easier life than we've had, but they learned more and began to come into the realization of the true purpose for life, which is not this purpose of aggrandizement, this purpose of accumulation, but probably the finest labor of life is service. Service to the needs of those who are still growing. Service to the needs of those who need the instruction by example which we can give. The service that will put persons into responsibilities where they can guide the lesser along the way. In the wisdom cycle of things, those who have learned become the parents who must guide the children who have not yet matured that completely. So all the way along there is a pattern and a law behind everything. And this law is something that in itself is not cruel. There's nothing unkind about it. It's really all most kind thing in the world. It is simply a simple fact that we are creatures that depend upon a universal pattern for our own survival. our breath, our food, our air, the water we drink, the vegetation that fills this planet. Everything is part of a great lawful scheme, something that is so tremendous and incredible that we can't even imagine it in its real substance. But all of these things are part of one vast totality. And man is one of the fragments of this totality. He is part of it. If he stays with it and keeps its rules, he has security. If he turns upon it to exploit it and destroy it, he destroys not his locality but himself. We are assured that the individual who really wants to grow can do so, that nothing can stop growth except the failure of the determination within the person. We are not the victims of the strength of obstacles. We are victims of the weakness in ourselves. And to realize this is to help us to build a more useful and more perfect life in the future. So if perfection is hard to come by, it is still the most desirable thing in the world. And how shall we know it? Well, probably the most perfect answer we have to that is that perfection in ourselves gives us the power, the strength of internal, to enable us to recognize the infinite perfection in all things. The moment we become perfect in ourselves, we behold a perfect universe. And being in a perfect universe, we live accordingly. While we are not perfected in ourselves, we see as through a glass darkly. And with our imperfect vision, behold the tragedies that have resulted from our own mistakes. But that which is perfect, as we must ultimately become, is that in which truth is sovereign. Reality is accepted without question, and each individual is doing that which was his original purpose in existence. Therefore, we are all growing towards a divinity that is not only ruling all things, but a divinity that is ruling us from within ourselves. The more we evolve, the more we unfold our potentials, the more that which is eternal within ourselves achieves victory over the temporal. It is the God in us, the Christ in us, that is the hope of glory. And the release of that power must come through the disciplining of the nature. The mind must be rectified. The emotions must be purified. The body must be made responsive to the needs of the inner life. And the environment in which we live must be beautified to the degree that we can accomplish it, so that all things that are necessary for the fulfillment of the divine plan can be achieved within ourselves. If we take these matters seriously and not painfully, just quietly, it's no more difficult perhaps than it is to learn to play a good game of golf. It may be not any more difficulty than knowing when you have trumped your neighbor's ace in a game of bridge. It makes life not a game exactly, but a tremendous challenge. A challenge which can cause us to release potentials we do not even know that we have. But life is not one disaster after another. It is the need to clarify in one straight line of thinking by which nearly all disasters are minimized. So if we really want to grow as rapidly as we can and come a little nearer to that eternal rightness which we all hope to attain someday, then the problem is to start now. Count 10 with grandmother and start in thinking through quietly and in straight, rational way every complication of your life, and think how, with graciousness, with kindness, with love and forgiveness, you can clarify most of these complications. As this process develops, your health will improve, your friends will be more numerous, your relatives will welcome you, and the great plan of nature will reward you with peace of soul. These are the things which we all work toward. Well, I think that's it, but I got an announcement to make. We have in the library this morning a new exhibit which we think you will enjoy. Many of you probably have been down in the New Mexican area, where these tribes, Indian tribes, the Hopi, Zuni, Navajo, and so forth, have their rituals and their wonderful dolls, the Ketchinas. These godlings have been part of Indian mythology and legendary from very ancient times. Masked dancers are found in the religions of practically all people, and always we find the myths and legends involved in them. This interesting gentleman who we have with us in the library, or at least we have his work, is a Mr. Florian Gabriel. He lived in these areas for years. He is a very gifted artist, and he has created a display of the masked dances of the Zuni, Hopi, and Navajo peoples. His work is not photographic. His work is dramatic and dynamic, and he has made these mysterious little beings that are like the gnomes and elves of Europe into very real, dramatic, and tremendous artistic creatures. And we have a very nice display of his work in the library. We want to thank him for having brought these to us, and we think you will all enjoy seeing these little masked dancers that represent the spirits that come to the various villages in the mesas of New Mexico and Arizona. We hope you'll take a look. I think you'll find it very interesting. Thank you very much.